Owen was not expecting visitors that morning. He had been sitting outside his small outpost since sunrise, drinking his second cup of tea and watching the flat, cracked land stretch out in every direction. Sorn was not a beautiful planet. It was dry and pale and hot, and the wind that moved across it carried fine white dust that got into everything, into food, into boots, into the corners of eyes. Owen had been stationed here for 4 months, and he still had not gotten used to the dust. He was about to go back inside when he saw something moving far out on the flatlands. At first he thought it was an animal. It was low to the ground and slow, moving in a way that looked wrong, too careful, too unsteady. Owen put down his cup and stood up, shading his eyes with his hand. The sun was already high and harsh, and the light bounced off the pale ground in a way that made everything shimmer and blur. Then the shape got closer and Owen saw what it was. It was a child. A Draknari child, walking alone across the open flats in the middle of the day. Owen had seen Draknari before. They were a tall, proud dragon species with dark-scaled skin, broad shoulders, and long necks that they carried high when they walked. The adults were impressive in a way that was hard to ignore. But this child was nothing like that. This child was small. Much smaller than Owen expected. His scales were a dull gray-brown, almost the color of the dust around him, and he was moving with his head down and his arms wrapped around his own middle, like he was trying to hold himself together. Owen watched him for a moment without moving. The boy stopped about 10 meters from the outpost. He stood there, not coming closer, not leaving. His legs were shaking slightly. His eyes, which were a pale amber color, moved from Owen to the outpost door to the ground and back again. He looked like he very much wanted to leave but could not make his body do it. Owen did not call out to him. He did not wave or smile or make any sudden movements. He simply turned and walked into the outpost, took a large metal canteen from the shelf, filled it from the water tank and walked back outside. He walked slowly toward the boy. The boy's whole body went stiff. His eyes locked onto Owen and he shifted his weight back, ready to run. Owen stopped walking. He held the canteen out at arm's length and waited. The boy stared at it. His throat moved as he swallowed. Owen could see the shape of the boy's ribs through the thin fabric of his wrap, and the skin, the scales, around his mouth were cracked and pale at the edges. Owen set the canteen on the ground and stepped back. The boy stood still for a long moment. Then very slowly he came forward. He crouched down and picked up the canteen with both hands. His fingers were shaking. He lifted it to his mouth and drank, and then he couldn't stop. He drank in long, desperate pulls, water spilling down the sides of his chin, his eyes closing. When he finally lowered the canteen he was breathing hard through his nose and his hands were still gripping it like he was afraid someone would take it away. He looked up at Owen. Owen nodded once and sat down on the ground right where he was standing, not on a chair, not on the step of the outpost. Just on the dirt, cross-legged, like sitting on cracked alien ground in the middle of the day was a perfectly normal thing to do. The boy looked at him for a while. Then slowly he sat down too. They did not speak. Owen did not ask who the boy was or where he had come from or why he was alone out here in the flatlands with no water. He just sat there in the quiet heat and let the boy rest. A dry wind moved between them, carrying dust. Somewhere far off, something made a low sound like a horn and then went silent. The boy drank more water. Slower this time. Owen got up once and went inside. He came back with a small cloth, a piece of flatbread, and a handful of dried fruit, the kind that came in the supply packages and that Owen never really enjoyed eating. He placed them on the ground in front of the boy the same way he had placed the canteen, without ceremony, without words, and then sat back down. The boy looked at the food. He looked at Owen. Then he looked at the food again. He ate. Owen watched the flatlands while the boy ate. He watched the way the heat made the distant rocks look like they were floating. He watched a small dust cloud move across the far edge of the plain, slow and quiet, turning and shifting like something alive. This planet had a strange kind of beauty if you looked for a long time without expecting anything from it. After a while the boy spoke. His voice was very quiet. Almost too quiet to hear. He was not looking at Owen when he said it. He was looking at the ground, at his own clawed hands wrapped around the canteen. His words came out rough and dry despite the water, like speaking was something he had been holding back for a long time. He said he needed water. That was all he said. Just those 4 words. But the way he said them, with his head down and his shoulders pulled in, like he was bracing for something, told Owen that saying even that much had cost the boy something real. Owen nodded. He did not say of course or no problem or you should have asked sooner. He did not say anything that would make the moment bigger or heavier than it already was. He simply nodded, the same way he had nodded before, and looked back out at the flatlands. The boy let out a slow breath. He was maybe 9 or 10 years old in human terms. Owen guessed, though it was hard to know with Draknari. Old enough to know that his people did not come to outsiders for help. Old enough to understand that what he had just done, walking out here alone across open ground in the heat of the day, would be seen as weakness by anyone in his settlement who found out. Old enough to feel the weight of that. But he had come anyway because his body had run out of choices before his pride had. Owen understood that kind of desperation. He had read enough about Varethsorn before his assignment to know that the settlement to the northeast had been struggling for years. No clean water, crops failing, the old river that had once fed the whole region now nothing but a dry trench full of cracked mud. He had put in 3 separate requests to his organization to expand outreach to that settlement. All 3 had come back with the same answer: the Draknari did not want outside contact. Their elder council had been clear about that. And yet here was this boy, sitting in the dirt outside a human outpost, holding an empty canteen with both hands, eating dried fruit that he probably found strange and maybe not very good. Owen refilled the canteen without being asked. The boy watched him do it. Something moved through the boy's amber eyes, something careful and quiet, not quite trust but maybe the very first small step toward it. Like a door that has been shut so long the hinges have gone stiff, and someone has just pressed a hand against it very gently, not pushing, just resting there. The sun moved. The shadows shifted. The dust kept blowing. Eventually the boy stood up. He was steadier on his feet now. The shaking in his legs was gone and his eyes were clearer. He held out the canteen to return it and Owen waved his hand once. "Keep it." The boy looked at the canteen in his hands for a moment. Then he tucked it against his side. He did not say thank you. Owen did not expect him to. Among the Draknari, Owen knew accepting help was already difficult enough. Acknowledging it out loud was something else entirely. The boy turned and began walking back across the flatlands toward the distant smudge of his settlement. Owen watched him go until he was just a small moving shape against the pale dust, and then smaller still and then gone. He picked up his cold cup of tea and went back inside. He did not know the boy's name. He did not know if he would ever see him again. He did not know what, if anything, would come of the last hour of quiet sitting and shared water and dried fruit on alien ground. But Owen had learned a long time ago that some things begin very small. Quieter than a word. Smaller than a gesture. Sometimes they begin with nothing more than a canteen set down gently on cracked dry dirt, and someone willing to step back and wait. Ash came back the next morning. He told himself he was not going to. He had lain on his sleeping mat the night before, staring at the low ceiling of his family's shelter, telling himself that going once was already too much. That someone would notice. That Elder Gorn had eyes and ears all through the settlement, and if word got out that a Draknari boy had gone to the human outpost and sat in the dirt and eaten the humans' food and kept the humans' canteen, the shame of it would fall not just on him but on his whole family. He told himself all of that. And then the sun came up and his throat was dry again, and he picked up the canteen from where he had hidden it under his mat, and he walked back out across the flatlands. Owen was outside when he arrived. He was sitting on an old wooden crate with a notebook open on his knee, writing something. He looked up when Ash got close, gave the same single nod as the day before and went back to writing. He did not look surprised. He did not make a big thing of it. He simply reached behind the crate without looking and held out a full canteen. Ash took it and sat down in the same spot as yesterday. They stayed like that for a while. Owen writing, Ash drinking slowly, the dry wind moving between them. After some time Owen closed the notebook and looked out at the flatlands with a calm, quiet expression, like a man with nowhere better to be and no wish to be anywhere else. Ash came back the day after that too. And the day after that. By the 4th visit he had stopped checking over his shoulder quite so much on the walk across the flats. By the 6th he was arriving before Owen had even finished his morning tea, and Owen had started leaving a filled canteen on the crate outside so Ash would have it the moment he arrived. Neither of them talked about this. It was simply a thing that happened like the sun rising or the dust blowing. But on the 7th day something changed. Owen had his notebook open again and he looked up from it and asked in a voice that was easy and unhurried, how many people lived in Ash's settlement? Ash went still. His eyes moved to Owen's face. Owen was not looking at him. He was looking at his notebook, pen resting loosely in his fingers, like the question was a small one with no weight behind it. Like he was just curious the same way someone might ask what the weather had been like. Ash did not answer. Owen did not push. He just waited the way he always waited, without pressure, without impatience. After a long moment he wrote something down in the notebook, though Ash had not said anything at all. The next day he asked where the river used to run. Ash almost left. He stood up and looked toward the flatlands and felt the familiar pull of his training, The old Draknari instinct that said outsiders should not know your settlement's business, should not know your weakness, should not be given anything they could one day use against you. The elders had taught this since before Ash could remember. Strangers did not help. Strangers watched and waited and took. But Owen was still just sitting there with his notebook, not watching Ash at all, looking at a small dry plant growing between the rocks near the outpost wall like it was the most interesting thing he had seen all week. Ash sat back down. He said the river used to run along the north edge of the settlement. He said it like he was talking about something that had happened to someone else, keeping his voice flat. Owen wrote it down without looking up. After that, something loosened. Not all at once. Not in any single moment. But over the next few visits, Ash found himself talking more. Owen would ask one question, just one, always soft, always patient, and Ash would answer it. Sometimes with one word. Sometimes with more. Owen never seemed to want more than Ash was ready to give, and that made it easier to give a little more each time. He learned that Owen wrote everything down. Not just the answers to his questions but small things. The direction the wind came from, the color of the dust on a particular morning, the sound a certain bird made from somewhere in the rocks. Owen's notebook was nearly full, and there was a small stack of older ones inside the outpost that Ash could see through the open door when he looked. Years of notebooks. Years of writing things down. One afternoon Ash asked why Owen wrote so much. Owen thought about it for a moment. Then he said that writing things down was how humans made sure they did not forget. He said that humans had very short lives and very ordinary memories, and they had learned a long time ago that if they did not write things down they would lose them. He said that every time a human wrote something down, they were leaving it for the next person, so that whoever came after them would not have to start from nothing. Ash turned this over in his mind for a long time. The Draknari did not write much. They passed things down in spoken memory, the elders told the young, and the young grew into elders and told the next generation. It was considered a point of pride. Written records were for species who could not trust their own memory. But the river had been gone for 60 years. And no one in the settlement knew why. Owen asked more questions over the following days. How deep the old riverbed was. Whether the ground around it had ever flooded, or whether the water had simply slowed and then stopped. Whether the elders had any stories about when the river had been full, whether it had gone slowly or quickly. Ash told him what he knew. He went home some evenings and carefully thought back through everything the elders had ever said about the river, all the fragments and half-stories and old complaints, and he brought them back the next day and gave them to Owen one piece at a time. Owen wrote it all down. Then one morning Owen came outside carrying a flat-screen tablet instead of his notebook. He sat down on the crate and balanced it on his knee and began pressing through something on it, scrolling and tapping, his eyes moving quickly over whatever he was reading. Ash watched him without asking. After a while Owen turned the screen around and held it out. It was a map. An old one, covered in lines and numbers and colored patches, green, brown, dark blue. It showed the land around the settlement from above, the kind of image that could only be taken from very high up. Ash had never seen a map like this before. He took the screen carefully in both hands and looked at it. Owen leaned forward and pointed to a thick blue line running across the map. He said that was the river. Ash found the settlement on the map and traced the blue line with one claw. It ran along the north edge exactly where he had described. Then it curved south and then, he frowned, it went underground. The blue line did not stop. It simply went from a solid line to a dotted one and kept going, running beneath the land, passing almost directly under where the settlement now stood. Owen said the river had not vanished. He said it slowly and clearly, the way someone says a thing they want to make sure lands properly. He said the land in this region had shifted a long time ago, layers of rock deep underground had moved and pressed upward, and the pressure had pushed the river down below the surface. He said this kind of thing happened on many planets over long periods of time. He said the water was still there. He said his people had been sitting above a river for 60 years and did not know it. Ash stared at the screen. He looked at the dotted blue line running under the land. Under the cracked, pale, bone-dry ground where his people had been dying slowly for 2 generations. Under the dust and the rock and the dried mud of the empty riverbed. He followed the dotted line with his eyes until it passed beneath the center of the settlement, then further, then out the other side. The water was there. It had always been there. His hands tightened on the edge of the screen. Something moved in his chest, sharp and strange and hard to name. Not quite anger. Not quite grief. Something between the two, pressing up from somewhere deep. He looked up at Owen. Owen was watching him with a quiet, steady expression. Not triumphant. Not pleased with himself. Just watching, the way he always watched, like he understood that what had just happened inside Ash was not a small thing, and it deserved a moment of stillness. The dry wind blew across the flatlands. Ash looked back down at the map. He stayed for a long time that day. Long past when he should have gone home. He sat with the screen in his hands and looked at that dotted blue line until it felt burned behind his eyes, until he could have drawn it from memory on any surface in the world. The water was there. It had always been there. Ash ran. He had not planned to run. He had planned to walk back calmly, to think carefully about how he would say it, to choose his words the way Owen chose his, slow and careful and one at a time. But the moment he stepped away from the outpost and felt the hot wind hit his face, his legs just started moving faster. Then faster. Then he was running across the flatlands with the screen's image still burning in his mind, the dotted blue line, the river that had not gone anywhere, the water sitting quiet and hidden beneath his people's feet for 60 years. He had to tell someone. He had to tell everyone. He arrived at the settlement out of breath, dust on his scales, the old canteen bouncing at his side. The settlement was a collection of low stone buildings and stretched canvas shelters arranged around a central space that had once been a gathering place near the river. Now it was just a dry square of cracked earth where the elders sometimes sat in the evenings and spoke about the old days. Ash ran straight to the elder hall. He should have stopped. He knew that later. He should have caught his breath, washed his face, thought it through. He should have found his mother first, or one of the younger adults who sometimes listened with a little more patience. But he was 10 years old and the news inside him felt too large to carry any further, and so he pushed open the heavy door of the elder hall and walked in. Elder Gorn was inside. He was sitting at the long stone table with two other elders, Bram and Scylla, both of them old and gray-scaled and slow-moving. All three of them looked up when Ash came in. Gorn's eyes dropped immediately to the canteen at Ash's side. The human canteen, with its smooth metal body and the small stamped mark on the side that no Draknari had made. The room went very quiet. Ash told them anyway. He told them about Owen. About the outpost. About the questions in the notebook and the old maps on the screen. He told them about the river, that it had not disappeared, that the ground had shifted and pushed it down, that it was still running beneath them right now, beneath the dry earth under their feet. He said it as clearly as he could, his voice shaking not from fear but from the size of the thing he was saying. He expected surprise. He expected questions. He expected something to open up in the room. Elder Gorn looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then he stood up. He was a large Draknari, Gorn, wide across the shoulders, with deep charcoal scales and eyes that had gone from amber to a flat pale gold with age. He had led the settlement for over 30 years. He had watched the river dry up. He had watched crops fail and families struggle and young people grow up knowing only shortage and dust. He carried all of that in the lines of his face and the set of his jaw, and when he stood up to his full height in that low-ceilinged room, the air in the space changed. He asked Ash how long. Ash said 7 days. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. It had weight in it. It had heat. Gorn asked if anyone else knew. Ash said no. Gorn looked at Bram. Bram looked at Scylla. Something passed between the three of them that Ash could not read. A whole conversation in a single exchange of glances, the kind that only happened between people who had known each other for decades. Then Gorn told Ash that he was forbidden from leaving the settlement. Ash opened his mouth. Gorn told him to close it. He said it quietly, which was worse than shouting. He said that Ash had gone behind the council's back. That he had given a stranger, a human stranger, information about the settlement's water, its river, its people. He said that the Draknari did not go to outsiders with their problems. That they had never done so and would not begin now. He said that whatever this human had shown Ash on his screen was either wrong or was a trick designed to make them feel weak and grateful and dependent, and that the Draknari would not be made to feel any of those things. Ash said, but the water is there. Gorn said that was enough. Ash was taken home. His mother, who had not known where he had been going each morning, stood in the doorway of their shelter with an expression that Ash had never seen on her face before, something between relief and a grief she was trying to keep inside. She did not shout at him either. She just pulled him in and closed the door. He was not allowed to leave for 3 days. He sat in the shelter and thought about the dotted blue line. He thought about it so hard and for so long that it became the shape of his frustration, that quiet line running under everything, carrying all that water to nowhere, while his people sat above it and went thirsty and called it fate. Owen waited. He gave it 2 days. Then 3. Then 5. He sat outside the outpost each morning with a filled canteen on the crate and watched the flatlands and drank his tea. The canteen sat there untouched. No small shape appeared on the horizon, moving slow and careful across the dust. On the 7th day Owen went inside and spent a long time at his desk. He printed the geological maps on flat paper, the full set, 6 pages showing the underground water path from every angle. He printed the drilling schematics too, simple ones that did not require heavy equipment, the kind of plans that could be followed by people with basic tools and enough patience. He wrote out notes in the margins in plain, clear language, explaining each step in the simplest words he could find. Then he sat for a long time with a blank piece of paper and a pen. He thought about what to say. He thought about saying that he hoped they would use the maps. He thought about explaining the drilling process again. He thought about asking them to contact him if they needed help. He wrote a few lines and crossed them out. Then a few more. In the end he wrote 6 words and stopped. He folded everything together, the maps, the schematics, the notes, the small folded piece of paper with his 6 words on it, and put it all in a flat waterproof envelope. He wrote nothing on the outside of it. No name. No address. No marking of any kind. He walked out into the afternoon heat. It took him 40 minutes to walk to the settlement boundary, a low line of stacked stones that marked the edge of Draknari land, old and uneven, stretching away in both directions across the flat ground. Owen stopped at the boundary and looked at the settlement in the distance. He could see the low buildings, the canvas shelters, a few figures moving between them in the slow way of people saving their energy in the heat. He crouched down and placed the envelope on the ground just inside the boundary line, held down by a flat stone so the wind would not take it. Then he stood up, turned around and walked back toward the outpost. He did not look back. The 3 young Draknari who found the envelope were not looking for it. Dav and Rem were brothers, 17 and 15, who often walked the boundary line in the evenings for no better reason than that it was something to do when the settlement felt too small and too quiet. The third, a girl named Fun, came with them most evenings because she found staying inside even harder than they did. Dav almost stepped on the envelope. He picked it up and turned it over. No markings. He looked at Remington. Rem shrugged. Fun was already opening it. They spread the papers on the flat ground and crouched over them in the long evening light. The maps meant little to them at first, just lines and numbers. But the notes in the margins were written simply enough that Fun could follow them, and she read them aloud slowly while the brothers listened. By the time she finished, all 3 of them were very still. Dav found the small folded paper last, tucked between the map pages. He unfolded it and read it. Then he read it again. He held it out so the other 2 could read it. They did. The 6 words sat there in plain, neat handwriting on the small square of paper. No payment. No deal. No obligation. I just thought you should have this. Nobody spoke for a while. A dry wind came across the flatlands and moved the edges of the papers. Fun pressed her hand down to keep them still. Then Rem said it quietly, almost to himself, not really to the others, the words coming out slow and a little uncertain, like he was saying something he had never had reason to say before. He said that no one had ever done that before. The other 2 did not answer. They did not need to. It started with Dav. Ash had not planned to tell anyone. After the 3 days locked in the shelter, after his mother's quiet sadness and Elder Gorn's cold silence, he had decided to let it go. He had told himself that the maps were gone, the envelope was gone, and whatever happened next was not his problem anymore. He was 10 years old. He had already done more than most adults would have. He told himself all of that. Then Dav found him at the edge of the settlement one evening and sat down beside him without being asked, and held out the folded piece of paper with Owen's 6 words on it, and said, "We read the maps." Ash looked at the paper for a long time. Then he told Dav everything. Dav listened the way Owen listened, without interrupting, without making faces, without telling Ash he was wrong or foolish or too young to understand. When Ash finished, Dav sat quietly for a moment. Then he called Rem over. Then Fun. Then 2 others, a quiet boy named Cal who was good with his hands, and an older girl named Ren who had once tried to dig a well behind her family's shelter before the elders told her to stop. They sat in a circle in the dust while the settlement went dark around them. Ash spread the drilling schematics on the ground. Dav had kept the whole envelope hidden under a loose stone in the boundary wall, and they looked at them together in the low evening light. The plans were simple. Owen had made sure of that. Dig here. Angle this way. Watch for this color of rock because it means you are getting close. Stop if the ground feels wet. Do not rush the last part. Ren said she thought they could do it. Cal said he knew where to get tools. They decided to begin the next morning before sunrise. The digging was harder than any of them expected. The ground at the spot marked on the map, a point about 200 meters north of the settlement, just past the old dry riverbed, was pale and packed and reluctant. It did not want to be opened. The top layer crumbled easily enough, but beneath it the earth was almost like stone, dry and pressed tight by years without rain. Cal's borrowed tools scraped and chipped and made a lot of noise for very little progress. By the second morning they had a hole the size of a water barrel and nothing to show for it but sore arms and blistered hands. Rem said maybe they were in the wrong spot. Ren said they were in the right spot and needed to go deeper. Finn said they needed better tools. Ash said nothing. He looked at the hole and thought about the dotted blue line on the map and tried to hold on to the certainty he had felt when he first saw it. It was harder to hold on to out here in the dust with aching hands and a hole that seemed to go nowhere. That evening he walked back across the flatlands. Owen was inside the outpost when Ash knocked. He opened the door and looked at the boy, at the dust on his scales, the raw skin at his palms where the tool handles had rubbed, the look on his face that was somewhere between determined and desperate. He opened the door wider without a word. Ash told him about the group. About the maps and the digging and the 2 days of hard ground and no progress. He told him where they had started and how deep they had gone. Owen listened, then asked 2 short questions about the color of the rock they were hitting and how far from the old riverbed they were working. Then he went to the back of the outpost and started putting things in a bag. Ash watched him pack. A longer tool with a flat angled end, a small device that Owen strapped to his wrist, a second water canteen, a folded sheet with more notes on it. Owen pulled on a pair of heavy boots that were already dirty from previous use, laced them up and stood. He said, "Let's go." The group was still at the dig site when Ash came back across the flatlands with Owen walking beside him. They all stopped what they were doing and stared. Owen was not a large man. Standing next to Dav and Rem he looked almost small. They were young Draknari but already taller than most adult humans, with broad-scaled shoulders and hands that could wrap around Owen's arm with room to spare. Owen looked at the hole. He crouched beside it and pressed the wrist device against the ground in 3 different places. He studied the readings for a moment, then moved 6 steps to the left and pressed it again. He stood up and pointed to the new spot. He said they were close but slightly off. He said the rock layer here was thinner and the angle was better. He said they should start a new hole here and go straight down, not at an angle. Then he picked up one of the tools and started digging. Nobody moved for a moment. It was Fun who started first, picking up her tool and coming to stand beside Owen. Then Remington. Then the others. Ash took his place on the other side of Owen and began to dig. They worked in shifts. While some dug, others rested. Owen did not rest. He kept working through the first shift and into the second, digging steadily in the pale dirt, not fast but not stopping. His shirt was dark with sweat inside an hour. His boots were buried in dust. He dug without complaining and without looking up to see if anyone was watching him. After a while Rem asked, quietly, not quite sure how to ask it, why Owen knew about the underground water. Owen kept digging while he answered. He said humans had spent a long time on their own planet making mistakes about water. He said there had been whole regions of Earth, great stretches of land, that humans had turned to desert by using water faster than the ground could replace it. He said there had been rivers that humans had drained completely, lakes that had dried up because too many people had taken too much for too long. He said that some cities had run out of water entirely and fallen apart because of it. The young Draknari stopped digging and stared at him. Owen looked up and saw their faces and smiled a little. He said, "Yes, really?" He said humans had made almost every possible mistake there was to make with water. And with land. And with air. He said his people had a long and thorough history of getting things badly wrong. Dav asked how they had survived it. Owen said they had written it down. He said every time something went wrong, the people who survived made sure to record what had happened and why so that the people who came after them would know. He said the knowledge had not always been used well, and humans had sometimes repeated the same mistakes anyway, but over time the record of failures had grown into something useful. He said that hiding failure, pretending it had not happened, calling it something other than what it was, those things had cost his people more than the failures themselves. The digging went quiet for a moment. Ren said that the Draknari did not speak of failures. Owen nodded. He said he knew. He said he understood why. Pride was not nothing and there was real value in it. But he said there was a difference between pride and silence, and that the silence was the part that cost you. He went back to digging. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows changed. They worked through the hottest part of the afternoon, taking turns, passing the canteens between them. Owen showed Cal how to angle the flat-ended tool to get under the hard rock layer rather than hammering straight into it. He showed Finn how to read the small device on his wrist, what the numbers meant and what to watch for. At some point Ash stopped digging and just watched Owen for a while. He watched this small, soft-skinned human crouching in alien dirt on a planet that was not his, working without being asked, without being paid, without anyone telling him he had to be here. His hands were red under the dust. There was a scrape along one knuckle that had bled a little and dried. He had finished his water an hour ago and not said anything about it. Ash asked him if he was afraid. Owen sat back on his heels and thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. He said, "A little." He said the ground was unpredictable and the tools were not built for this kind of rock, and he was not entirely sure the readings on the wrist device were accurate this far from the calibration point. Then he said he would be more afraid of walking away. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said most things, like it was just a fact about himself, something he had known for a long time and was not particularly surprised by. Ash looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up his tool and went back to digging. They hit the rock wall on the third day. It was not like the other rock they had been cutting through. The other rock had been hard and dry and stubborn, but it had given way eventually, chipped apart piece by piece, carried out of the hole in handfuls and small broken chunks. This was different. This was a flat, solid wall of dark stone that ran across the bottom of the hole like a floor someone had laid on purpose. Cal's tool hit it and rang out with a sound like a bell, and the vibration ran up his arms so hard he nearly dropped the handle. He hit it again. Same sound. Same feeling. He looked up at the others from the bottom of the hole. Nobody said anything. Owen crouched at the edge and pressed his wrist device against the rock wall at the bottom. He studied the numbers for a moment. Then he pressed it in 3 other spots along the wall, moving carefully, his face calm and still. Ash watched him from the other side of the hole and tried to read his expression the way he had learned to over the past weeks. Owen's face when things were going well looked almost the same as Owen's face when things were not going well. That was both reassuring and deeply frustrating. Owen sat back and looked at the wall for a long time. Then he said, "The water is on the other side of this." Rem asked how thick the wall was. Owen said he was not completely sure. He said the device was giving him a reading, but the rock type was dense and the signal was not clean. He said it could be 1/2 meter. He said it could be more. Ren asked what they should do. Owen said they needed to find a weak point. He said no rock wall was perfectly even. There were always thinner spots, small cracks, places where the pressure from the other side had been working at the stone for years without anyone knowing. He said if they could find one of those spots and focus everything there, they had a chance. He climbed down into the hole. They worked through the rest of that day and into the next morning. Owen moved along the wall slowly, tapping it in different places with a smaller tool, listening to the sound each tap made. Most of them rang hard and flat. But near the left side, about halfway up the wall, there was a spot where the sound changed, just slightly, just barely. A little less solid. A little more hollow. Owen marked it with a scratch and climbed out and let the others take over. Cal and DAV took turns with the flat-ended tool, focused entirely on that one marked spot. It was slow, exhausting work. The rock gave nothing easily. Chips the size of a fingernail fell away with each strike. The sun moved. The shifts changed. Everyone drank water and went back to it. By the end of the second day, the marked spot had become a shallow dent about the size of a fist. Rem sat down in the dust and pressed his palms against his eyes. Finn stood at the edge of the hole with her arms crossed and said nothing, but her jaw was tight and her tail moved in short, sharp sweeps, the Draknari sign of frustration that she probably did not know she was making. Even Cal, who was the quietest of all of them and the least likely to complain, put his tool down and looked at the wall with an expression that had gone flat and tired. Ash looked at each of them in turn. Then he looked at Owen. Owen was eating a piece of flatbread and looking at the sky. Ash asked him, honestly, just between them, voice low, if he thought it was going to work. Owen chewed, swallowed, looked at the hole. He said he thought they were very close. He said that rock does not hollow itself from one side. The sound of that spot meant something was pressing at it from the other side, and the only thing in this region pressing at rock from that direction was water. He said close did not always feel like close when you were in the middle of it. He said the last part was always the hardest part because the last part was where most people stopped. Ash nodded slowly. He climbed down into the hole, picked up the tool and started again. They did not hear Elder Gorn coming. The first sign was the shadow. The dig site was open ground, flat and exposed, and when a group of large Draknari warriors walked across it in the late morning light, they cast long shadows that fell across the hole before anything else. Ash was at the bottom when he saw the light change above him. He looked up. Gorn was standing at the edge of the hole looking down at him. Behind Gorn were 4 warriors, adults, broad and armored in the dark leather wrapping that the settlement guards wore. Behind them, a small number of other settlement members had followed at a distance, drawn by whatever had brought Gorn out this far. They stood back and watched. Gorn looked at the hole. He looked at the scattered tools and the pile of broken rock and the group of young Draknari standing in frozen silence around the site. His eyes moved to Owen, who had stood up from where he was crouching and was now standing very still with his arms at his sides, watching the elder with a calm, quiet expression. Gorn said stop. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the kind of weight that came from 30 years of being listened to, and it fell over the site like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody moved. Ash climbed slowly out of the hole. He stood beside it and looked at Gorn and did not look away, even though every instinct in him said to step back. Gorn told them that this had gone far enough. He said the council had not given permission for this. He said an outsider was on Draknari land without invitation, working on Draknari ground, and that this was not how things were done. His voice was measured and final, the voice of a man who had already decided and was not here to discuss. He told the warriors to fill the hole. One of the warriors stepped forward. And then the ground moved. Not violently. Not like an earthquake. It was a small, deep shudder, the kind that came from far below, from something shifting that had been held in place for a very long time, finally deciding it did not want to be held anymore. Everyone felt it through the soles of their feet. The warrior stopped walking. From the bottom of the hole came a sound. A low, thin hiss at first, the sound of something very small finding a very small space to move through. Then a trickle. A thin line of dark water appearing along the left side of the hole, running down the wall, pooling at the bottom. Everyone stared. The trickle became a stream. The stream pushed wider. The hollow spot in the wall, the one Cal and Dav had been striking for 2 days, the one that had given only a fist-sized dent, suddenly cracked. A sound like a deep knock came up from the hole, and then another crack ran sideways from the first, and then the whole section of wall gave way at once. The water did not trickle after that. It came up hard and fast and full, bursting through the broken rock face, filling the bottom of the hole in seconds and then rising. Rising fast, carrying broken stone with it, foaming white at the edges, rushing upward with the pressure of 60 years behind it. It hit the top of the hole and kept going, spraying outward across the dry ground in every direction, soaking into the cracked pale earth, spreading across the flat ground in thin fast sheets that caught the sunlight as they moved. Everyone froze. The warriors froze. The watching crowd froze. The young Draknari stood with water running over their feet and did not move or breathe. Elder Gorn stood at the edge of the spring. The water rushed over his claws and across the ground around him, and he looked down at it with an expression that no one in the settlement had ever seen on his face before. It was not the face he wore in the Elder Hall. It was not the face of 30 years of hard decisions and held pride and careful control. It was something older than all of that, something that had been buried under those layers for a long time and was only now, in this moment, finding its way to the surface. He raised his eyes and looked at Owen. Owen was standing ankle-deep in the spreading water with his filthy boots soaked through and a grin on his face that he was clearly not trying to control. He was not triumphant. He was not performing anything. He was just genuinely, simply happy, the way someone is happy when a thing they believed in turns out to be true. Gorn looked at him for a long time. His pride moved in his chest like something trying to find the right shape. It pushed against the other thing, the softer thing, the thing that had no name in the Draknari language because it had never needed one before. The two of them pressed against each other and neither one fully won. Gorn did not apologize. He did not say thank you. He did not say he had been wrong. He did not say anything at all. He nodded. One slow, deliberate nod, the kind that cost something to give. Owen nodded back the same way he had nodded at Ash that very first morning, once simple without making it more than it was. And then Ash, who had been standing at the edge of all of this with water rushing around his feet and 60 years of his people's thirst ending in front of his eyes, did something he had not done in longer than he could remember. He laughed. It came out sudden and real and a little surprised, like it had been waiting inside him for the right moment and had finally decided this was it. He stood in the middle of the rising water with his arms out and his head back and laughed, full and loud and free, while the spring spread across the dry ground of Varethsorn and soaked into everything it touched. The warriors looked at each other. Some of the crowd began to move forward, slowly toward the water. And the dry earth drank. The ground remembered water quickly. That was the thing that surprised everyone most. Not the spring itself, not the sound it made or the way it spread across the dry earth on that first day, but how fast the land responded once the water was there. Within a week, thin lines of green had begun pushing up through the pale cracked soil around the spring. Not crops yet. Just small wild things, seeds that had been sitting in the dry ground for years with nowhere to go, finally given a reason to move. They came up cautious and thin, but they came. Ash watched them every morning. He had made a habit of going to the spring at sunrise, before the settlement was fully awake, and sitting at its edge for a while. The water was clear and steady and cold, running out from the broken rock face and spreading into the shallow channel that Dav and Cal and the others had dug to direct it toward the settlement storage basins. It made a low, constant sound, not loud, just present, the way good things often were. Always there. Always moving. He brought his copy of the maps with him most mornings. Owen had printed a set for him on the last visit before everything changed. 6 pages, folded and kept in a flat case that Ash had made from a piece of stiff leather. He spread them on the rock beside the spring sometimes and looked at them, tracing the lines he had memorized by now, following the underground paths that the water had taken for 60 years without anyone knowing. He was starting to understand them properly. The numbers, the color bands, the small symbols in the margins. Owen had explained them patiently over many days, and what had once looked like a foreign language was slowly becoming readable. Ash was not fast at it yet, but he was getting there. The settlement changed in ways that were hard to point to directly but easy to feel. The storage basins filled within 2 weeks. The elders organized water distribution, carefully at first, old habits of shortage dying slowly, but as the spring kept running steady and unchanged, the careful measuring began to relax. People started using water the way water was meant to be used. Washing. Cooking properly. Watering the ground in the growing plots on the settlement's south side. Wren had started a proper dig in the growing plots the day after the spring came in. She had drawn up her own rough plan using Owen's notes as a base, and she had 3 other young Draknari working with her before the end of the first week. By the end of the 3rd week there were thin green rows of something beginning to grow in the turned earth, and Wren walked among them in the evenings with the look of someone who had been right about something for a long time and was only now being allowed to show it. Dav and Rem had taken the geological maps and begun studying the wider region, looking at where else the underground water might be running, whether there were other points where it came close to the surface, whether the spring they had found was the only one or just the first. They came to Ash with questions sometimes, and Ash answered what he could and directed the rest toward Owen's notes. Elder Gorn watched all of this. He did not comment on it directly. He did not stand at the spring and make speeches or call meetings to discuss the new situation. He simply watched, walking the settlement in the early mornings the way he always had, moving slowly, observing. Ash saw him sometimes from the spring's edge, a large dark shape moving between the shelters in the low morning light. One morning about 2 weeks after the spring came in, a narrow communication line appeared on Owen's outpost screen. A simple open channel, no message, no explanation. Just an open line from the settlement's old communication unit, which had not been used for outside contact in over a decade. Owen looked at it for a moment and then marked it active and left it that way. He never mentioned it to anyone. He did not need to. The notice came on a morning that looked like every other morning. Owen read it at his desk with his tea going cold beside him. A reassignment order. His time on Verithsorn was complete. A transport would arrive in 4 days to take him to his next posting. He was to leave the outpost in standard condition and submit his final reports before departure. He sat with the notice for a while. Then he finished his tea, picked up his notebook and went outside to sit on the crate. He told Ash that afternoon, when the boy arrived at the outpost after his morning at the spring. He said it simply and without making his face do anything complicated. He was leaving in 4 days, and he wanted Ash to know with enough time to ask anything he still wanted to ask. Ash sat down on the ground and did not say anything for a while. Then he asked, the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for weeks, since the day at the dig site when Owen had talked about Earth and failures and writing things down. He had been saving it without knowing he was saving it, and now he asked it. He asked Owen what the greatest thing humans had ever made was. Owen leaned back against the outpost wall and looked at the sky. He thought about it the way he thought about everything, honestly, taking his time, not reaching for the first answer that came. Ash had seen him do this enough times to know that the pause was not uncertainty. It was respect for the question. Owen said, not a tool. He said humans had made extraordinary tools. Machines that could move mountains, devices that could see through solid rock, engines that could carry a person from one side of a galaxy to the other. He said none of those were the answer. He said not a weapon either. He said humans had made weapons that could end a city in a moment, weapons that could poison an entire atmosphere, weapons that their own people were still ashamed of and hoped never to use again. He said those were certainly not the answer. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the greatest thing humans had ever made was a decision. Not an object. Not a machine. A choice that enough people had made, enough times, over enough generations, that it had become part of how his people moved through the world. The decision to share what they knew. He said it quietly. He said that somewhere, a very long time ago, a human being had learned something Something important, something hard-won, something that had cost them suffering to understand. And instead of keeping it, instead of using it only for themselves or their family or their people, they had told someone else. A stranger maybe. Someone with no claim on the knowledge. And that stranger had told another. And the thing that one person had learned through pain had become, over time, a thing that nobody had to learn through pain again. He said that was the idea that had kept humans alive through everything. Not strength. Not technology. The choice to pass it on. Ash held his map case in both hands and looked at it. He thought about the dotted blue line. He thought about Owen's stack of old notebooks. He thought about the margin notes in plain language written so that anyone could follow them. He thought about a small folded piece of paper left at a boundary wall with 6 words on it and no name signed at the bottom. He thought he was beginning to understand. The transport came on the 4th morning as promised. It was a large gray vehicle that landed in the flat ground east of the outpost and sat with its engines idling, waiting. Owen came out of the outpost with a single pack over one shoulder and his most recent notebook in his hand. The outpost behind him was clean and orderly. His reports had been submitted the night before. He was almost at the transport when he saw Elder Gorn. The old elder was standing at the outpost boundary, the low line of stacked stones that marked the edge of Draknari land. He was alone. No warriors, no council members, no one beside him. Just Gorn, standing in the early morning light with the dust moving slowly around his feet, watching Owen come across the flat ground. Owen stopped when he reached the boundary. The two of them stood on opposite sides of the low stone line and looked at each other. Gorn was taller by a full head and wider by a great deal, and he carried his age in his scales and his eyes in a way that made him seem like something that had been standing in this landscape for as long as the rock had. Owen was dusty and small and carrying one bag. Gorn spoke. He said it slowly, choosing each word with care, the way someone speaks when they have thought about what they want to say for a long time and want to make sure none of it is wasted. He said, "You gave a thirsty child water without being asked. That is why we finally listened." Owen looked at him. He nodded once, the same nod he had given Ash on that very first morning, the same nod he had given Gorn at the spring. Simple. Unhurried. Without making it more than it was or less than it was. Then he turned and walked to the transport. Ash was at the spring when the transport lifted. He heard it before he saw it, a low rising sound from the east, building slowly until it became a deep vibration that moved through the ground beneath him and up through his feet. He stood up and turned and watched the gray shape climb above the flat horizon, growing smaller as it rose, catching the early light on its surface for a moment before it tilted and moved away and became just a point and then nothing. He stood at the edge of the spring for a long time after it was gone. The water ran past his feet, cold and clear and steady, the same as every morning. The thin green lines in the soil around it had grown a little more overnight. He could see new ones, small and pale, just beginning to push through. Behind him the settlement was waking up. He could hear the sounds of it, movement and voices and the ordinary noise of people beginning another day. He looked down at the map case in his hands. He opened it and took out the top page, the one with the blue line, the one he had looked at so many times that the paper had gone soft at the folds. He looked at it for a moment. The underground paths. The numbers in the margins. The small neat symbols that he could now read almost as easily as his own language. He thought about what Owen had said. The greatest thing was not a tool. Was not a machine. It was the decision to share what you knew, so the next person would not have to suffer the same way. Ash folded the map carefully and put it back in the case. Then he turned away from the horizon and walked back toward the settlement, toward Dav and Rem and their questions about the wider water maps, toward Ren and her growing rows of green, toward a people who were only just beginning to learn how to look for the things that had always been there. The dragon boy had asked for water. The human had given him the knowledge to never go thirsty again, and with it, a future his people had stopped believing in.